The first time I heard I owed $80,000, I was standing in line at Target with a pack of toilet paper under my arm and my debit card already maxed from rent. A woman from the bank spoke calmly in my ear while my heart pounded so hard I could barely hear people around me. She said my first payment was 90 days past due, that they had already tried to contact me at the address on file, that my account was going into collections. By the time she finished, my hands were shaking so much the toilet paper slipped and rolled across the floor, and a kid started kicking it like a soccer ball. I just stood there with the phone pressed to my ear and said the only thing that made sense in my head. I said, I never took out any loan. She sounded bored, like she had heard this excuse 100 times that morning. She rattled off my full name, my social security number, my current address in Columbus, the last 4 digits of my checking account. Every detail was right. She said the loan had been approved 3 months earlier at a branch downtown, that I had signed in person, and that they had copies in my file. While she talked, I opened my banking app and saw a red warning banner that had not been there yesterday. It mentioned possible legal action. My stomach tightened. The only debt I had was a small car payment and a credit card I paid off each month. $80,000 meant someone had gone inside my life, pulled out all the numbers, and used them like Lego blocks. When she offered to email me the documents, I agreed so fast I almost cut her off. I walked out of Target without buying anything, sat in my car, and stared at my phone until the email came through. The PDF opened slowly, line by line, on a cheap screen that now held my entire future. The loan application was filled with my information, my job at the logistics warehouse, my salary, even the contact info for my supervisor. At the bottom was a messy signature that was supposed to be mine. It looked close enough that a stranger would not question it. My chest felt tight. I scrolled down to the second page and saw something worse. A copy of my driver's license, slightly tilted, with the glare of a kitchen light across the plastic. I knew that light and that counter. The photo had been taken on my brother's phone while he stayed with me in March. I had let my older brother Tyler crash on my couch for 3 weeks after his second divorce. He said he needed time to find a place and get his feet under him. I remembered him picking up my wallet that first night, laughing about how my license photo made me look tired, then snapping a picture and sending it to his own phone. I had not thought about it twice. Seeing that exact picture scanned into a bank file made my hands go cold on the steering wheel. I pulled up the email attachments again. There was a final document, a grainy security camera still from the branch. A man stood at the counter, signing a stack of papers. The image was fuzzy, but I knew the shape of that head, the shoulders, the cheap leather jacket he wore everywhere. It was not me. It was Tyler. My phone buzzed with another call, this time from an unknown local number. When I answered, a man introduced himself as the collections manager for the bank. He said they were preparing to initiate wage garnishment and possibly a civil suit. I heard myself say, "That is not me in your photo. That is my brother." He said they had no record of any brother and they only dealt with the person whose name was on the documents. Then he said something that snapped whatever was holding me together. He said if this turned out to be fraud and I had signed anything for someone else, I could be charged too. I hung up on him before I started to swear. My pulse hammered in my neck. Right then I knew 2 things. My brother had stolen my name, and this was not going to be a quick conversation with customer service. I drove to my brother's place before I even went home. He had finally moved into a cheap apartment on the west side, the kind of complex with peeling paint and random grocery carts left near the stairs. He opened the door in sweatpants and an old team hoodie, smelling like weed and bacon grease, and grinned like I had come over to watch the game. When I held up my phone and spun the screen toward him, his face changed so fast I saw every stage of panic flash through it. He tried to laugh. He tried to grab the phone. He tried to deny everything in the same breath. That was when I realized this was not a stupid mistake. He had planned it. Behind him, I heard my mother call my name from the couch. I had not even known she was there. My mother sat there in the corner of the sagging couch, wrapped in a faded blanket, with a mug of something on the coffee table. The television was muted on some daytime show. She looked between us and then at the phone in my hand as if it might explode. She said my name again, softer, and asked what was going on. I walked in without waiting for an invitation and put the phone right on the coffee table. The security camera still stared up at us. The copy of my license glowed under it. My signature, or something that wanted to be my signature, sat at the bottom of the loan document like a bad joke. Tyler stayed by the door with his arms spread, as if he could block me from leaving and still pretend to smile. I told my mother exactly what the bank woman had said. I kept my voice steady, but my throat was dry and my hands were shaking again. I laid it all out, the 80,000, the missed payments, the threats of wage garnishment, the possibility of charges. When I said the word fraud, my mother flinched. Tyler jumped in fast, talking over me. He said, "It is not like that, and it is just paperwork, and they will not come after you." He called it a mix-up. He called it a temporary thing. Not once did he look at the picture of himself on the screen. My mother finally focused on the photo. Her eyes narrowed, then flicked up to the real person who matched it. For a moment, she looked ready to slap him. Her jaw worked like she was chewing words before they could come out. Then she turned to me and grabbed my wrist. There was a tightness in her grip I remembered from childhood when she pulled us out of stores for fighting. She said, "Lower your voice. The neighbors can hear." And her first instinct made my chest ache with a twisted kind of nostalgia. Even now, with my life on fire, she was worried about what people in the hallway might think. I pulled my arm away and told them both that the bank had evidence, that this was not something we could smooth out with a story. Tyler finally dropped the act and snapped that he had no choice. He said he had been behind on child support and rent, that his credit was ruined, that no one would approve him for anything. He said I had a good job and no kids, and that I could handle it. He said, "You are the only one they would give it to," like he was explaining why he had borrowed my jacket without asking. My mother put her head in her hands. There was a moment where I expected her to back me. Instead, she lifted her head and told me I should calm down and that family can figure things out. She asked me not to go to the police. She said my brother would pay it back as soon as he could, that we just needed time, that it would ruin his life if I made this official. Hearing my own mother minimize what he had done made something harden inside me. I asked her if she understood that my life was the one already ruined, that my credit could be destroyed, that I could lose my job if I got tied up in legal trouble, that the bank already thought I was lying. She looked torn for maybe 3 seconds. Then her face settled into the same stubborn line I had known since childhood. She said, "We do not put family in jail." I left before I said something I could not take back. As I stepped into the hallway, my brother followed and hissed in my ear that if I brought cops into it, I would regret it. His breath was hot and sour. For a second, my body reacted the way it used to when he towered over me in middle school, fists balled. My muscles tensed, and I fought the urge to swing. I walked away without looking back. On the drive home, my phone buzzed constantly, texts from my mother and brother piling up. At a red light, I glanced at them. My mother begging me to give him a chance to fix it. My brother calling me dramatic. Then one that made me press my lips together so hard they hurt. He wrote that if I really cared about being a man, I would handle my responsibilities. The next day at work, the consequences started to spread. The HR manager called me into her office, shut the door, and slid a letter across the desk. It was a notice from the same bank about a potential garnishment order. She asked if everything was all right at home and whether I needed financial counseling. It was humiliating to see my private disaster dressed up as concern on company letterhead. I explained as much as I could without naming names, that there had been identity theft, that I was contesting it. She listened, nodded, and made some notes. I watched her pen scratch across forms that would follow me in my file for years. When she said company policy required her to report any pending legal issues involving fraud if they became criminal, my chest tightened again. This was not just about a loan anymore. It was about my entire future being tied to what my brother had done. That night, I lay awake in my apartment staring at the ceiling, listening to my upstairs neighbor stomp around. My mind kept replaying the image of my brother's face frozen in that grainy bank still. I thought about every time as kids he had talked me into taking the blame for something so he could avoid punishment. I thought about my mother standing in that apartment, not even asking me if I was all right, only worrying about him. There was no sleep coming. At 3 a.m, I sat up, grabbed my laptop, and typed in the words identity theft and family. The results were ugly. Most advice said the same thing. File a police report. Protect yourself, even if it was family. Especially then. I closed the laptop, sat there in the dark, and knew I was going to have to pick a side, and that no matter which one I chose, something in my family was going to break for good. I made the report 2 days later at a small police station tucked between a laundromat and a diner. The officer at the front desk looked half asleep. When I explained, He raised an eyebrow and asked a lot of questions about why someone close to me would do that. His tone said he heard versions of this story all the time. He had me fill out a stack of forms describing the fraud, listing dates and amounts, attaching the bank documents I printed at home. I felt like I was writing an essay where every sentence accused my own brother. At the end, he slid me a case number and said a detective would follow up. He also warned me that money cases moved slowly and that the bank had to push for charges. Walking back out into the parking lot, the reality of what I had set in motion hit me. If this went forward, there would be no pretending it was just a family argument. On the way home, I stopped at my mother's house, because avoiding her was not going to solve anything. The place looked smaller than I remembered, a little duplex she had rented after my parents' divorce, with the same garden gnomes sinking into the dirt by the steps. She opened the door, already frowning. For a second, I saw panic in her eyes, like she expected officers behind me. When she realized I had come alone, her shoulders sank. She stepped aside so I could enter. The living room still had the same floral couch from my teenage years, the same pictures on the wall, but the air felt different. Heavy. I told her straight, without circling. I had filed a report. The bank was likely to press charges. She interrupted me 3 times to say no and asked me to go back and undo it. When she understood I could not, something brittle cracked in her voice. She said I knew how hard things had been for my brother, how he struggled after his divorce and layoffs, how his ex took him to court over money. She reminded me that she had helped me when I was broke after my own car accident last year, that she had co-signed my first car loan years earlier. Her eyes filled with tears, but her words had an edge. She asked whether this was how I repaid family. I had to bite down inside my cheek before I answered. I told her calmly that she co-signed a real loan that I had asked for and paid on, that I had never taken her name and signed it on something without her consent. I pointed at the family photos on the wall and asked her how she would feel if I had done this to her. She did not answer. Instead, she said something that made the room tilt for a moment. She said, "It is not like this is the first time we have used your credit." Then she clamped her mouth shut like she had said too much. I stared at her. My heart rate jumped. I asked what she meant. She waved her hand and muttered that she did not mean anything, that she was tired. The words would not leave my head, though. The first time. Back home, I pulled my credit report. I had already checked it briefly, but this time I went line by line. There was the big loan from the bank. There were my known accounts. Then I saw 2 old store cards I had never used and a small personal line of credit opened when I was 19, the year I was juggling school and 2 part-time jobs and barely checking my mail. They had been paid off and closed years ago, but my name was on them all. I called customer service for one of the old lines and asked for application details. After some security verifications and transfers, a woman told me it had been opened at a branch in my hometown with an in-person signature. She offered to email a copy if I wanted. I ended the call, staring at the floor. There was only one way that could have happened without me. Someone in my family had been doing this for years on a smaller scale, and I had never noticed because the amounts were low and the payments were made. The loan from my brother was just the first one that crashed and dragged everything into the open. A few days later, the detective called. His voice was brisk, tired, professional. He said he had spoken with the bank and seen the documents, and that they were very interested in pursuing charges. He also said, with zero emotion, that if I did not cooperate fully and if there was any sign I had consented, I could be charged as an accomplice. I felt a cold sweat slide down my back as he explained how these cases often devolved into family members trying to cover for each other and ending up tangled together. He said he needed a clear statement from me naming my brother as the person who had taken my ID and opened the account. I agreed, even though part of me wanted to hang up and disappear. After the call, I sat on my couch staring at my phone. My mother had stopped texting me. Tyler had sent only one message that morning, a short one that called me soft and told me not to pick up strange numbers. I saved the detective contact in my phone and went into my messages with my family. I scrolled back through months of conversations and screenshots, looking for anything that showed my brother admitting what he had done. There was nothing. He had been careful. Too careful. That was when I realized I needed more than the bank photo and my word if I wanted this to stick and keep myself safe. I needed one of them to say it out loud. Help came from someone I did not expect. At work, in the break room with the humming soda machine, I sat hunched over my phone reading yet another email from the bank. My coworker and friend, Luis, sat down across from me with his reheated leftovers and watched me for a moment. Then he asked if I was in trouble, the kind that involved money. I hesitated, then told him the basics. Broke the privacy promise I had made to myself. His face tightened in a way that told me I was not the first person he knew with this problem. He said his cousin had gone through something similar and that the worst thing you could do was try to handle it alone. He wrote a number on a napkin for a legal aid attorney his family had used. That evening, I called the number. The attorney, Ms. Patel, spoke quickly, asked for documents by email, and did not waste time on sympathy. She laid out the situation like a map. The bank wanted its money and did not care about my family drama. The police wanted clear evidence of fraud and clear cooperation. If I protected my brother, they would treat me as part of the scheme. She told me to freeze my credit, dispute the accounts in writing, and keep records of every interaction with my family about the loan. When I mentioned the old lines of credit I had discovered, she hummed in a way that told me she was both annoyed and unsurprised. She said it was possible the pattern could help show that I had been treated as a walking credit score for years. Then she suggested something that made my stomach churn. She said if I spoke with my mother or brother again about the loan, I should record the conversation as long as state law allowed. She explained that an admission on tape could be the difference between the prosecutor going hard after them or dropping the case. I pictured my mother's face on the couch and felt sick. The idea of catching her words like evidence felt dirty. But the idea of going down for a crime I did not commit felt worse. A week later, my mother called me out of the blue and asked me to come over. Her voice sounded hoarse. I pressed the record button on my phone before I answered. My hands shook slightly as I hid the device in my jacket pocket. When I arrived, she looked thinner, hair pulled back in a messy knot. There were unopened envelopes on the coffee table with bank logos on them. She asked if the police had called me. I said yes. She asked what I had told them. I said the truth. Her eyes filled again. She started talking then. About how hard things had been after my father left. About how the bills had piled up when I was in high school. About the first time she had used my information to open a small store card for school clothes. Telling herself she would pay it off and that it was not really wrong because she planned to keep it under control. She admitted she had done it again with a small line of credit to help my brother when he lost his job and fell behind on rent. She said all of that like a confession and like a justification at the same time. Then she said the line I knew the attorney would care about the most. She said that when Tyler came to her with the idea for the big loan this year, she had told him no at first because it was too much, but he had already taken the picture of my license, and she knew he would try it with or without her. She said she had told him where to go, which bank would be most likely to approve it, because they knew my work history and had seen regular deposits, since my paycheck went there. She said she did not think they would give him that much. She covered her face when she said it. My stomach twisted. On the recording, her words sounded clear and damning. She never once asked how I was sleeping or if I had eaten. She only asked whether there was any way I could delay the case so he could find a way to pay something. Later that night, I sent the audio file to Ms. Patel and then sat staring at my phone, feeling like I had just handed a stranger the keys to my entire life. My brother texted not long after, asking what Mom had said and telling me I should stop dragging her into this. He followed it up with a threat that sounded more desperate than scary, about how if he went down, he would take everyone with him. I forwarded the messages to the detective without replying. 2 days later, the detective called again. His tone was different now, more focused. He said the recording and text messages were exactly what they needed. The bank had formally pressed charges. A warrant had been issued for my brother. There was talk of possible charges against my mother for her role in the earlier accounts, but the prosecutor was considering focusing on restitution instead if she cooperated. Hearing that made my chest feel heavy. I had wanted protection, not revenge against her. But the line between those two goals was blurring fast. When I hung up, I realized this had passed the point where I could change my mind. Whatever happened next, there would be court dates, lawyers, public records. My family was not going to forgive me for that. The question was whether I could forgive myself. They arrested my brother on a Thursday afternoon outside the warehouse where he picked up occasional shifts. The detective called later and told me he had gone quietly. No drama, no chase. The idea of Tyler in handcuffs was something I had joked about as a kid when he stole things from the corner store, but the reality landed with a dull weight. My phone lit up within an hour with calls from my aunt, from my mother's neighbor, from an unknown number that turned out to be his second ex-wife. Some wanted details. Some wanted to yell. A few wanted to know if I felt better now. I let most of them go to voicemail. My mother left the longest message. Her voice sounded shredded. She accused me of choosing money over blood. She said I had always been jealous of how close she and Tyler were. She also admitted, without realizing how it sounded, that she had begged him to run when she heard there might be a warrant. That message went right into the folder I had created for evidence, even as each word cut into me. The first court hearing was a blur of wood benches, fluorescent lights, and stale coffee smell. I sat in the gallery with my attorney while my brother was led in wearing an orange jumpsuit that looked wrong on him, but also, in some bitter part of my mind, unsurprising. He scanned the room until he saw me. His eyes locked on mine, full of anger and something else I could not name. Fear maybe. Betrayal. The judge read out the charges, a list of words that made everything sound clean and clinical. Fraud. Identity theft. Forgery. There was a mention of the amount and of my name. Hearing my name in that room, in that tone, made my chest tighten again. When it was my turn to speak, it was not like the dramatic scenes on television. There was no long speech. My attorney guided me through the statement we had prepared. I explained how I had discovered the loan, that I had not authorized it, that I had reported it to the bank and police as soon as I knew. The prosecutor asked a few follow-up questions about my relationship with my brother, about the previous accounts. I could feel my mother's eyes on me from the back row as I talked. I could not bring myself to turn around and look at her. During a break, I stepped into the hallway for air. My mother followed. She grabbed my arm and hissed that I should tell the judge it had all been a misunderstanding and that Tyler had my permission after all. Her nails dug into my skin through my shirt. There were tears in her eyes again, but her mouth was tight with anger. I looked at her and saw not my mother, but someone who had decided I was expendable as long as her favorite child stayed out of trouble. I gently pulled my arm away and told her I was not going to lie under oath. She called me a stranger and walked away. The word felt worse than any curse. The real climax came a month later at the main hearing, when the evidence was laid out in more detail. The bank representative testified about the application process. They showed the security camera stills again, clearer prints this time, where you could see my brother's tattoos under his jacket sleeve as he signed. They played parts of the audio recording of my mother admitting what she had done in the past. I stared at a fixed point on the table while her voice echoed off the courtroom walls. My brother kept shaking his head, jaw clenched. His attorney tried to argue that he had acted under financial duress, that the family had a pattern of shared credit, that I had benefited from it too. Hearing myself framed as part of a shady family scheme made bile rise in my throat. When I took the stand again, his attorney pressed me hard. He asked whether I had ever used money that came from those old lines of credit, whether I had known my mother struggled with bills, whether I had ever said my income and credit were there to help the family. I answered honestly. Yes, I had worn clothes bought with that store card at 19, not knowing the account was in my name. Yes, I knew my mother had struggled, which was why I always held back on asking her for help. No, I had never told anyone they could open accounts without my knowledge. My voice stayed steady, but my hands were tied on the rail. At the end of that day, the judge reviewed everything and announced his decision. Tyler was sentenced to a few years in state prison, with mandatory restitution to the bank and to me. The amount was huge, more than he would ever realistically repay, but it meant any future income he had would be partially redirected. The judge also admonished my mother for her role, but the prosecutor had chosen not to charge her formally in exchange for full cooperation and a signed statement. Instead, part of the restitution order involved a lien on her small house, since it had been used as collateral in one of the older credit lines that tied into the pattern. I heard her gasp behind me. When the deputy moved to take my brother back into custody, he twisted in his chains and stared at me one last time. His voice was low, but I heard it clearly as the room emptied. He said I was dead to him. I stood there for a moment after the judge left, the noise of people shuffling around buzzing in my ears. This was the moment I had said I wanted, where the system recognized I was the victim. It did not feel like victory. It felt like standing in the middle of a burned-out house, alive, but surrounded by ash. Months passed. Life did not snap back into place like a rubber band. It crept. I spent hours on the phone with credit bureaus, mailing certified letters, answering questions from skeptical call center workers. Slowly, Some of the black marks faded from my report as the fraudulent accounts were flagged. The bank eventually reclassified the big loan under the fraud category, though they warned that if new information came up suggesting I had consented, they could reverse that decision. That line hung over me like a storm cloud that never quite left. Work settled into a new normal. HR stopped asking follow-up questions, especially after I brought in a letter from the bank confirming my status as victim. A few co-workers who had heard rumors treated me differently for a while, some more sympathetic, some more distant. Luis stayed the same, sliding me coffee during long shifts and never turning my life into gossip. On quiet nights, I caught myself thinking that if he had not pushed me to call that attorney, I might have tried to handle everything with just family talks and ended up ruined. My mother and I stopped speaking. For the first few weeks after the sentencing, she still sent occasional texts, mini sermons about forgiveness, about how time could fix things. I did not respond. Eventually, the messages shifted from guilt to anger, accusing me of loving money more than blood, of forgetting where I came from. I blocked her number after she left a voicemail in which she blamed me for the lien on her house, as if the years of secret credit use had not set that up long before I ever filed a report. Cutting contact felt like pulling out an infected splinter. It hurt, but there was also a strange relieved silence afterward. The only contact I had with my brother came in the form of a single letter about 6 months into his sentence. The envelope arrived with a correctional facility stamp that made my stomach twist as I carried it up the stairs. Inside, his handwriting slanted across lined paper. He did not apologize. He wrote that I had overreacted, that everyone in the family had always shared, that Mom had helped me with my car loan, and that this was just the same thing on a larger scale. He claimed I had ruined his kids' lives by sending their father to prison. He also said something that stuck in my head more than the insults. He said Mom had always told him that I would be fine, that I had a good head and stable job, that I owed it to them to help because they had sacrificed for me. Reading that, I realized how deep the narrative ran in their minds. In their version of the story, I was not an individual with boundaries. I was a resource. My credit score, my steady paycheck, my lack of kids, all of it turned into justification. That was the real theft. Not just my name on paper, but my right to say no. I folded the letter carefully, not because it deserved care, but because some part of me knew I might need it one day, maybe for my own therapist, maybe for a future lawyer, maybe just as a reminder that I was not crazy. I put it in the same folder with the court documents and recordings, and then locked the drawer. One afternoon, almost a year later, my niece drew a picture for me. Her mother, my brother's ex, brought the kids to a park near my apartment and asked if I wanted to see them. I hesitated, then agreed. The children were quieter than I remembered, older in ways that had nothing to do with height. My niece handed me a crumpled page from a coloring book where she had drawn 3 stick figures holding hands. Above one, she had written her own name in wobbly letters. Above another, she had written Dad. Above the third, she had written my name. No Mom, no Grandma, just us. When I asked why, she shrugged and said Grandma was always mad now and Mom and Dad did not like to talk about each other, but she knew I still answered when she asked about me. Hearing that almost broke me in the middle of a playground full of kids. After they left, I sat on a bench with that drawing on my lap. I thought about visiting my brother, about whether seeing him face to face would help either of us. Part of me wanted to ask him if he understood what he had actually done, beyond the money. Another part of me was afraid he would just repeat what he had written in that letter, that I was the one who had betrayed him, not the other way around. In the end, I did visit him once. The prison visiting area was loud and smelled like disinfectant. Tyler walked in wearing the same kind of uniform I had seen in court, looking thinner and older. For a moment, we just stared at each other. Then he sat down across from me. He asked how Mom was, how work was, how the kids were, all in a careful, flat voice. I answered simply. Finally, I asked him why. Not the surface reasons about money. The real why. He leaned back and rubbed his face. He said he had panicked when the child support bill stacked up. He said he had gone to our mother first, and that she had been the one to say my name. He said she told him I would understand, that I had a good heart and a steady job, that I owed it to the family to help. He admitted he had taken the picture of my license without asking because he knew I would say no if he did. Then he shrugged and said he figured he would get ahead and pay it back before anyone noticed. His tone suggested he still thought that plan had been reasonable. I felt something inside me finally settle when I heard that. There was no grand revelation, no sudden apology that made everything better, just a sad, small logic that laid bare the way they had all thought about me for years. I stood up when the guard called time. My brother asked if I would come back. I said I did not know. That was the truth. Back home that night, I sat at my kitchen table with a stack of mail. Among the junk and bills was a thin envelope from a credit union I had applied to. I opened it expecting another bland rejection or a secured card offer with terrible terms. Instead, the letter said I had been approved for a small, normal credit card at a reasonable rate, based entirely on my current income and the repaired parts of my report. My hands shook a little as I read it. This time, the account was in my name because I chose it, not because someone else needed a way out. I set the letter down and looked around my little apartment with its mismatched furniture and secondhand dishes. This was not the future I had imagined for myself a few years ago, before debt and courtrooms and family fights. It was quieter, smaller, but it was mine. For the first time since that phone call in Target, I felt a thin line of something like peace. Not because everything was fixed. My family was still broken in ways I did not know how to repair. My mother might never speak to me again. My brother would carry my name in his file forever. The real change was inside my own head. I understood now that protecting myself was not betrayal. Saying no was not cruelty. Holding someone accountable for stealing from me, even if we shared blood, was not choosing money over love. It was choosing myself after a lifetime of being the one expected to carry everyone else. I do not know if I will ever fully forgive them. I do not know if one day my mother will call from a number I do not recognize and I will hear a different tone in her voice. I do not know if my brother will ever send a letter that starts with the words "I am sorry" and means them. What I do know is that the next time anyone asks for my signature on anything, it will be because I read every line and decided it was worth it, and not because someone else decided my name was easier to use than their own.